It's a pleasure for me to be here with you this afternoon. I'm Javier Laureano, the Water Division Director for Region 2 EPA, Environmental Protection Agency in New York City, 290 Broadway. In Region 2, we have we work with New York, New Jersey, Puerto Rico, and the Virgin Islands. However, as most of you know, we also have a division in Puerto Rico that manages specific programs for the region in Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. We also work with 8 Indian nations in Region 2. Our session name is Sustainable and Regenerative Tourism. We have 4 persons, experts here with us this afternoon. The first one is Nildamarie Díaz, de la Compañía de Turismo de Puerto Rico, Puerto Rico Tourism Company. I wanted, to those of you just joining, I just wanted to mention that we do have interpretation from Spanish to English, English to Spanish, just in case you need it. Nildamarie Díaz Hiraldo holds a bachelor's degree in public communication from the UPR, University of Puerto Rico, and a master's degree in business administration. She has worked for 22 years in the Puerto Rico Tourism Company, holding the position of Sustainable Tourism Supervisor since 2008. From her position, Nildamarie she has the responsibility of implementing public policy to promote the sustainable development of Puerto Rico through the creation of several programs and initiatives that have received international recognition.
Para mí es un placer presentarles lo que realiza la División de Turismo Sostenible de la Compañía de Turismo de Puerto Rico a través de nuestra división. Una división que formalmente fue establecida en el 2008 y en la cual desde entonces hemos estado tratando de trabajar con diferentes enfoques. No uno en particular, sino varios enfoques que se integren entre sí. Así que hoy voy a tratar de hablarles sumamente breve de cada uno de estos enfoques, comenzando con el programa de certificación que tenemos establecido, de certificaciones verdes que tenemos establecido, donde nosotros estamos buscando, ¿verdad?, validar esas buenas acciones que están haciendo estos actores que están dentro de la industria turística del país. El segundo enfoque es el programa de educación, donde somos nosotros, a través de la División de Turismo Sostenible, los que tenemos un rol protagónico, ¿verdad? Tenemos esa responsabilidad, no solamente porque lo ordena la ley, sino porque es nuestra responsabilidad social y ambiental y empresarial, ¿verdad?, de dar a conocer temas de educación en sostenibilidad, siendo nosotros los recursos y también invitando a recursos de expertos en esta iniciativa. Tercero, está nuestro programa de turismo sostenible de base comunitaria, que es donde nosotros servimos de facilitadores a las comunidades que interesan desarrollar nuevas propuestas de experiencias turísticas, ¿verdad? Ellos son los protagonistas, nosotros servimos como de facilitador. Y por último, y no menos importante, está la colaboración sostenible, ¿verdad? Donde nosotros ahí reconocemos que tenemos que formar parte de una red de alianza y no sonar, ¿verdad?, de que todo lo podemos hacer nosotros o todo es nuestra responsabilidad. Así que vamos a trabajarlo de una forma organizada y en forma de red para poder sí hablar de manera responsable de un destino verde, un destino sostenible. Comenzando con ese programa de certificación que les anticipaba, este es un programa de certificación que ha tenido reconocimiento en diferentes premiaciones, Organización de Turismo del Caribe, Organización Mundial del Turismo, a nivel, ¿verdad?, de la OMT, y también un reconocimiento por parte de la EPA, y tiene 3 fases, ¿verdad? Tiene 3 tipos de programa, 3 certificaciones a través de este programa. El primero de ellos está enfocado en las instalaciones que ofrecen experiencias turísticas. Es bien importante resaltar que cada uno de estos programas de certificación están enlazados con los objetivos de desarrollo sostenible y nuestra Agenda 2030. No hay programa que nosotros desarrollemos en la División de Turismo Sostenible que no estén alineadas a esos objetivos de desarrollo sostenible. Así que en cada uno de ellos verán con cuáles de esos objetivos nosotros estamos trabajando. En este programa de instalaciones turísticas, que viene acompañado de una guía, que viene acompañado de unas métricas, también vienen unas condiciones descalificantes, ¿verdad? Nosotros reconocemos que en Puerto Rico hay muy buenas propuestas, ¿verdad?, de instalaciones turísticas, pero hay ciertas condiciones que ya de antemano los descalifica y no los hace elegibles a este programa de certificación. Alguno de ellos es que pues, el proyecto a proponerse o interesado en certificarse estén ubicados en zonas de inundables, que representen una amenaza a los hábitats o a especies en peligro, ¿verdad? Que no se haya trabajado un % considerable en temas de la vegetación. También tomamos en consideración importantes elementos ya en la fase operacional. Por ejemplo, penalizamos si estamos utilizando todavía a estas alturas luces incandescentes, si estamos aportando a contaminación lumínica o estamos utilizando luminaria inapropiada, específicamente todas esas instalaciones turísticas que quedan en la costa del país, ¿verdad? Y que no le hacen bien, por ejemplo, a nuestras zonas de anidaje, que sabemos que hay muchos grupos haciendo maravillosos esfuerzos por conservarlos, ¿verdad? También sabemos la problemática del tema del plástico de un solo uso, así que penalizamos a aquellos que todavía no han querido moverse de esa práctica de utilizar botellas de un solo uso en lugar de poner estaciones, ¿verdad? Así que algunos de esos criterios que nosotros sí tomamos en consideración y le damos valor es ese reemplazo de luminarias, estaciones para recargar botella de agua, equipos eficientes, ¿verdad? En consumo energético, en consumo de agua, la incorporación, por ejemplo, de baños de composta. Hablar de baños de composta hace muchos años era como un tema tabú en Puerto Rico, inconcebible e impensable. Ya hemos estado viendo cambios en ese sentido, así que, ¿verdad? Eso es lo que estamos buscando. Hasta el momento, este programa de certificación solamente tiene hospederías endosadas. Si tienen la oportunidad y utilizan ese código QR, van a ver un pequeño catálogo donde se destacan, ¿verdad?, cada una de estas propiedades que están certificadas, y esta es precisamente una de las buenas herramientas que estamos incorporando para reducir los desperdicios a través de la entrega de material promocional. Pero este programa no es exclusivo para hospederías, está abierto para museos, para centros de visitantes, y de hecho tenemos a uno de los oradores invitados en este panel que representa el portal El Yunque, que es una de esas facilidades que está en este momento en proceso de evaluación para también estar certificado. Por segundo, tenemos este programa de certificación para ecoturismo que está enfocado en las empresas que ofrecen experiencias turísticas en el país. Y en Puerto Rico hay una infinidad de experiencias turísticas en este momento, pero no todas pueden llamarse o considerarse empresas ecoturísticas. Así que este programa está buscando validar los que sí lo son. Tenemos también igualmente condiciones descalificantes. Dentro del programa no se certifican operaciones que utilicen motoras acuáticas o vehículos todoterreno, o aquellas que están en violación de leyes, reglamentos que pongan en riesgo, ¿verdad?, el recurso natural. Este programa de ecoturismo también tiene sus propias guías, tiene unos criterios básicos que deben cumplir todas las empresas, pero también unos criterios específicos según el tipo de actividad. Si mi actividad es alquiler de bicicletas, si mi actividad es en un ziplining, o si mi actividad es, por ejemplo, recorridos por veredas. ¿Qué nosotros buscamos fomentar? Que tengan códigos de conducta sostenible, que fomenten el no dejar rastros, basuras, ¿verdad?, que minimicen esa huella, que haya realmente un impacto local, que hayan elementos de educación en esa experiencia. Así que, ¿verdad?, eso es lo que estamos buscando a través del programa de ecoturismo. Nuevamente, la oportunidad también de utilizar el código QR para que conozcan esas 10 empresas que actualmente están certificadas y que cumplen con este programa de ecoturismo, y lo hemos ubicado allá en el mapa y cuál es nuestra intención. que no tenemos la totalidad de las empresas que actualmente ofrecen experiencias turísticas en Puerto Rico, que estén certificadas, que tengan esa conciencia y esa responsabilidad social y ambiental, y que empecemos a romper ese mensaje de que para yo ser responsable tengo que entrar en una inversión económica fuerte, no la puedo asumir, así que me mantengo en mi modelo de negocio antiguo, que no necesariamente es el que el ambiente y el destino está necesitando en este momento. Y por último, dentro del programa de certificaciones está el programa de agroturismo, que lo que estamos buscando es, respondiendo a esos intereses del viajero, a que estos espacios agrícolas reciban a turistas y que tengan experiencias en ese espacio. Nosotros no estamos buscando que el agricultor se convierta en hotelero y utilice esos terrenos que están destinados a la agricultura para construir nada. Al contrario, lo que queremos es probar que hay una experiencia posible dentro de esos espacios agrícolas donde el visitante y el local pueda conocer sobre buenas prácticas de agricultura, la importancia de hablar de la seguridad alimentaria, de darle valor al agricultor y a la labor que ellos realizan día tras día para darnos alimentos de calidad. Igualmente tienen también sus condiciones descalificantes, ¿verdad?, que no los hacen elegibles para certificar, pero miren toda la cantidad de proyectos que sí han logrado esta certificación, que también tiene sus guías y que están en un, ¿verdad?, y que cumplen con estos criterios de buenas prácticas, no solamente en su actividad de agricultura, sino también en la experiencia turística que han estado desarrollando. Es una oportunidad maravillosa porque el agricultor también da la oportunidad de presentarse como el experto, ¿verdad?, en materia del tipo de actividad agrícola que realizan. Así que es un intercambio rico en conocimiento, aprendemos a degustar, a valorar la gastronomía y a valorar nuestra tierra y el valor de nuestros cultivos. Otro enfoque que lo habíamos mencionado al principio era nuestro rol de hablar de programas de educación, de hablar de sostenibilidad. Y aunque nosotros podamos entender que ya la sostenibilidad es un concepto que se habla constantemente, la realidad es que todavía se sigue confundiendo. Todavía hay quienes piensan que la sostenibilidad es una campaña de promoción o que es un mercado nicho. La sostenibilidad debe ser la agenda de toda gestión que se haga, no solamente desde la División de Turismo Sostenible, sino toda la gestión que se haga en la compañía de turismo y en todas las otras dependencias del gobierno. La sostenibilidad no es exclusiva del turismo y eso es lo que estamos tratando de lograr a través de este programa de educación que se da virtual y que se da presencial, que incluye escuelas, universidades, diferentes segmentos de la industria turística y público general. Y hemos tenido muchísima participación y muchísimo respaldo e intercambios muy interesantes con recursos expertos en variedad de temas. Uno de los programas y uno de los enfoques que más nos llena es este programa de turismo sostenible de base comunitaria, que como les adelantaba, es la comunidad la que es la protagonista y nosotros simplemente servimos de facilitadores para que ellos, esta idea y este deseo que ellos tienen de desarrollar una experiencia turística en su espacio que beneficie directamente a la comunidad, ellos lo puedan lograr. Fíjense todos los objetivos de desarrollo sostenible que cubre este programa y nosotros, ¿verdad?, logramos a través de este programa de base comunitaria atender la reducción de la vulnerabilidad social y económica que viven muchas de nuestras comunidades, que antes no estaban visibilizadas porque solamente se recibía al gran contratista o a la persona que venía con mucho dinero para invertir en grandes hoteles y no se le daba el mismo espacio y la misma apertura a las comunidades que lo que tenían era mucho deseo, ¿verdad? Así que este programa es bien importante, reducimos vulnerabilidad social, logramos empoderar a las comunidades, tanto así que hay 2 comunidades con las que hemos estado trabajando que ya lograron generar empresas de ecoturismo y están certificadas con nosotros. Fomentamos la economía verde, generamos nuevos empleos y esa ganancia, ¿verdad?, se mantiene en la comunidad. Tenemos aquí 6 proyectos y dirán, pero ¿por qué solamente 6? Bueno, pues por nuestra capacidad de recursos humanos de la división, ¿verdad? Pero siempre estamos abiertos a dar asistencia a otras iniciativas que se nos acerquen. Y tenemos aquí comunidades que están operando solar, que tienen colmados comunitarios, que tienen en desarrollo un lugar de estudio, porque identificamos que más allá de pensar en lo que el turista necesita cuando llegue a ese espacio, también identificamos qué es lo que la comunidad receptora necesita. Si las necesidades de la comunidad receptora no están siendo atendidas, el programa, ¿verdad?, no está siendo desarrollado y planificado de forma sostenible y responsable. Así que combinamos. El último enfoque, y con esto acabamos, es esta colaboración sostenible. Identificamos muchos retos. Nosotros hemos identificado con el pasar del tiempo que hay una desconexión entre la ciencia, ¿verdad?, los que forman parte de la ciencia, los que representamos al gobierno y las comunidades. Estamos desconectados, estamos fragmentando iniciativas, muchos haciendo muy buenas iniciativas, pero no nos estamos comunicando o no nos estamos enterando. Fondos disponibles, pero no sabemos cómo acceder a él, y una necesidad de hablar más sobre la sostenibilidad y aplicarlo realmente. Finalmente, de la forma también que buscamos retos, encontramos oportunidades, la posibilidad de reforzar alianzas, de identificar nuevos colaboradores, de medir los procesos, ¿verdad?, de medir los resultados de los procesos que ya estamos trabajando, y que realmente podamos adoptar la Agenda 2030 como un plan de país. Nosotros necesitamos que no solamente la División de Turismo Sostenible o las organizaciones sin fines de lucro, que en esta mañana han hecho unas presentaciones maravillosas, hablen de la Agenda 2030 y de los ODS. Tenemos que adoptarlo como una agenda de país. Y esa es la oportunidad que tenemos, y así nosotros nos estamos encaminando a través de la División de Turismo Sostenible. Agradecida, y Javier, quizás te robe un minutito, pero muchísimas gracias.
No, gracias, muchas gracias. Tu tremenda presentación. La Agenda 2030 a la que se refiere Nildamarie fue adoptada por las Naciones Unidas, y la idea es alcanzar 17 objetivos de desarrollo sustentable para el año 2030. Esto lo adoptó las Naciones Unidas en el año 2015. So let's keep going with our panel. The next person is Keenan Adams, the Forest Supervisor of El Yunque National Forest. So welcome, Keenan, and thank you for joining us. You have about 10 to 12 minutes. Thank you.
Hey, I'm getting the Spanish translation. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes, we can see your screen. Yeah.
Perfect. So hi, I'm Keenan, and I manage Puerto Rican's crown jewel. And today I'm going to share with you examples of regenerative tourism in practice. This presentation is grounded in the concept of codependence. If our natural systems are not resilient, our communities will not be. If our communities are vulnerable, we fail our purpose of sustaining life as the Forest Service. To orient you, El Yunque National Forest is that green area in the red circle. And as you can see, it's Puerto Rico's, yes.
Hey, I apologize. Are you presenting some slides?
Yes, I am.
Okay, we cannot see it. We can see you, and we can hear you clearly.
But we can't see your slides, no.
All right, 1 second. Sorry about that. It said I was sharing earlier.
We can see, I think that's the visitor center, no? Yunque Visitor Center. Is that it? The background, that's what we can see, and you, but not the slides. Yep.
What about now?
No.
Still no.
No. Oh, now it's uploading. It's uploading. Yeah, now we can see it. Thank you.
All righty. We're not going to start over. So, but as you can see, Puerto Rico is this, El Yunque is this within this red circle, nestled in Puerto Rico. Now, El Yunque comes from the word Yunque, which means white lands, and this is the Mount Olympus for the native folks. And for the sake of time, I'm going to blow past El Yunque's ecological significance, but just know for it's Puerto Rican's crown jewel ecologically. El Yunque is very important to Puerto Rico. 20% of the tourism occurs, 20% of water for drinking. is that El Yunque. It comes from El Yunque, and it has a huge sense of place for the Puerto Rican identity. So for folks in the Caribbean, I don't have to talk about how devastating Irma and Maria were, but I would like to ask yourself, put yourself in the forest supervisor's shoes for 1 second. Imagine traversing impassable roads so you can get a look at El Yunque. And when you arrive, you see an entire forest with no leaves, as if a nuclear bomb exploded. You see major landslides blocking your roads and over $100 million of damages. You see all of this knowing that the weight of recovery in Puerto Rico's Northeast region's tourism economy is on your shoulders. So what do? We decided to not repair, but to regenerate. We asked, how can we use the funding to transform? We knew this would double the time for recovery. However, it would likely more than double the positive impacts. As a disturbance ecologist, I find it fascinating how disturbances push ecosystems through phases and states. The same can be applied for social and governance systems. What we realized at El Yunque is that the status quo of over-tourism model is on an unsustainable path, both socially and ecologically. We have to be intentional on being disruptive to the status quo and hopes that our disturbance pushes the tourism model to a state of regeneration. In terms of sustainability goals, these are in orders of Maslow's hierarchy of needs to some extent. If you notice, poverty is number one. And the poverty rates around El Yunque are extremely high. We're trying to do our part, which may be counterintuitive when you're looking at that action in isolation. However, in the context of all these goals, it makes complete sense. Now, for many in this conference, first time you met me was after Maria, and I had the pleasure of working side by side with you in recovery. Part of the work we did after Maria was to develop an alternative tourism model. And I want you to notice what are those key findings that occurred for us to have a sustainable tourism industry. And it's not what you think, where a lot of the times the money is invested in project by project. Here are the things that are really necessary in order to facilitate sustainability at an island-wide scale. And there's also the invisible burden, these things that are often unaccounted for, but have severe impacts in terms of having more and more people, how it degrades your energy, water, and other infrastructure that supports life, including the natural infrastructure. Now, in terms of regenerative tourism, because we're using this word, think about tourism and over-tourism as the places left in a worse condition, the assets are typically degraded. Sustainable is a concept of keeping things in their current condition where there's no harm being done. And regenerative is thinking about a better condition. A lot of times you'll see greenwashing occur with these words thrown out when in fact these things still may leave things in worse conditions than they are, especially if they're not accounting for the invisible burden. And these are basic principles of regenerative tourism in that schematic. And it hurts sometimes. So our top two selling items in the El Yunque stores were water bottles and ponchos. And we just flat out banned them. And now we have a replaceable or reusable water bottles that we hope will have a net effect of reducing single-use plastic use. And our ponchos, because it's a rainforest, now can be composted. And so we're trying to think of little small things like that add up. So I want to talk about some models that we've been deploying at El Yunque, get very tactical here. And this is our visitor center that was recently reopened in December. So our first model is to use your economic engine and allow partners to leverage. It's something we've learned in kindergarten called sharing, right? And this is really about equity. As mentioned earlier, we rethought how we can use space and place for impact. We changed El Portal from a visitor center to a visitor and community center. And this space can now facilitate mass tourism and community. It doesn't have to be either or. It provides a collaborative space for our partners, and we have an incubator to address all those human capital needs that are needed to develop a sustainable tourism system on the island. And this is the model's visualization, of where we can benefit or you can benefit if you have an economic engine. And this green space represents where your partners can benefit. They likely can do things that you cannot. And this is giving up a piece of your pie to help somebody else out. And this is where the equity comes in, because your overflow may be somebody else's necessity. And so this is just a simple model one, and I'll discuss an example. Our friends group, Amigos del Yunque, have a citizen science program, and essentially we need this data to inform our timber harvest for small precious hardwoods. But this program costs money to facilitate, and it creates a great learning experience. It really regenerates in so many positive ways for these young folks doing citizen science and communities where they're learning more and more about ecology and becoming trained and educated on forest. So in terms of transformation, we've added an event space capacity at El Portal's during El Portal's renovation, and we converted an underutilized area to an open space for corporate events as well as community events. In the past, we never fully realized our capacity in terms of time. Essentially, we were underutilizing 50% of our capacity because we were not open at night. And long story short, the federal government can't market. So we were trying to manage it ourselves, and it's really hard to manage an event space if you can't do any marketing. So now our friends group is going to manage that space, and the revenues from that will help them fund the citizen science program. And so now we've increased a public service, which will be more cultural events occurring now at El Yunque. We've expanded opportunities for local businesses, and now we can actually make better forest management decisions based upon the information being funded to the citizen science program. The next model is to give up control, seek transformation. And I like to view co-management at the intersection of this space. And this is a coalition of folks that we signed an MOU recently, where we're collaborating as a cohort of organizations for El Yunque. Now, most land managers have the same problem. This red circle represents your restoration work, and the blue circle represents how much money you're given to do your restoration. So we're having to think differently, and what I'm calling this is a snowball effect. So that gray circle is the work that your partners can do, and they can do things that are seek more funding. So for example, everybody loves funding solar panels now, and just some big thing about solar panels. So instead of us trying to put solar panels on potential of our facilities, our partners can potentially find money for that, right? And the whole idea is that when a partner does something, it displaces. And the more and more you do, it rolls down the hill, and it provides you enough money to do your restoration work. Now, a second example of Model 2 is Love in Motion. And if you work in sustainable regenerative tourism, you're not aware of these two stellar people, I suggest looking them up. Much of what we're developing is in co-creation with them. Now, the Forest Service, we cannot maintain all our trails. The vegetation grows back every 30 to 45 days. We get 200 inches of rain a year. Since the 80s, we've decommissioned over half of our trails because we could just not keep up. And this is problematic because the number one reason people come to El Yunque is for trails, and our visitation is exploding. So we have to find a way. Our old model was to wait for funding and to fund a nonprofit to do the work. However, the issue is, once the money ran out, the project stopped, and we were stuck with an open trail that we couldn't maintain. So we thought to ourselves, how can we create a model that regenerates? So we beta tested this during the pandemic. We sought transformation by injecting money into a nonprofit that was willing to do trail maintenance. They in turn developed a program that will convert a tourist experience into social impact, maintaining the trail. And this impact would be realized by the small businesses that would sustain this program, as well as the reduced cost to the Forest Service. And it helps the nonprofit with financial sustainability, and it also potentially helps the community, and it helps the community and nature benefits from this program as well. Now, I'd like to say, these type of voluntourism programs, as they're called, sometimes can be very problematic. And so it's very be careful to not create a saviorism program where the experience is centered on the volunteer versus the community. So just wanted to throw that out there. We're very cognizant of that in terms of equity. We realize we can't just have random partnerships, and we need to create synergistic systems that are interconnected. We wanted to have more businesses benefiting from El Yunque, again, addressing the sustainability goal #1 of poverty. We realized that the business acumen needed to be higher for local communities to capitalize. So we partnered with Keenan Adams to develop a business model and acceleration program. And so we gave them a storefront in our most visited area. So after a business graduates this accelerator program, they can have space in this store. And part of the revenue actually goes back into funding this business development program. So again, it regenerates, more and more businesses can be developed. It also kickstarts the business because they're getting prime placement, and it helps them become independent. And then that knowledge and those resources are given back to the community through word of mouth as well and mentoring. Again, we had to create an entire ecosystem. There are terms called conservation, finance, ballot measures, pay for success, voluntary surcharges, CSRs, ESGs. Essentially, those last two are the beneficiaries being responsible for the assets that they are extracting from. Yeah, the second model that is in design can be implemented next year. And so El Yunque gets 100 billion gallons of water a year. And it, as I mentioned, it creates a key source for the drinking water of Puerto Rico. Unfortunately, these water systems become impaired because of runoff, and there's a lot of watershed restoration that needs to occur. Also, it decreases the capacity. This is my favorite part. Today's rain is tomorrow's beer, and so we're partnering with the local beer company. They're going to develop an El Yunque beer. Some of that money goes into a fund for watershed restoration. And so just simple lessons learned. All models are wrong, some are useful. Start with equity, don't try to bake it in, and design for financial resiliency in mind. And looking forward to your questions, and sorry for the snafu earlier with Zoom. Thank you.
Moving the next panelist, presenter, Commissioner Joseph Boschulte. He's the Commissioner of the U.S. Virgin Islands Department of Tourism. So, Commissioner, thank you for joining us.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Joe Boschulte, Commissioner of Tourism, U.S. Virgin Islands. Happy to have this opportunity, and thank you for allowing us to share a little bit of what's going on here in the U.S. Virgin Islands. In the U.S. Virgin Islands, we understand the importance of sustainability to create a future for generations to come. Tourism represents 60% of our GDP here in the U.S. Virgin Islands. So fundamentally, we are dependent on the preservation of our islands, and we must unite to protect the precious resource that is. And there's nothing more illustrative of that is what we saw when we didn't have any tourism for a period of time during COVID. We learned to appreciate resources much more. And now we're back up and running in tourism, but much more responsible, I'd say, and I'll show you as we move through slide presentation. In the U.S. Virgin Islands, we have several sustainability initiatives. First, we want to have very responsible environmental awareness in our construction and our land management. Clearly, we have been dependent on fossil fuels for as long as I can remember, and we have begun the shift to renewable energy systems, which we hope will be better for our environment and be definitely better in terms of awareness of climate change. From the sustainability standpoint, we do believe that we have to invest in our agriculture and our local farming and sourcing. Right now, we import almost 90% of all goods that come in to the territory for residents and guests alike. We definitely need to see a balancing of that. Of course, we benefit from our water resources around us, so it's critical for us to protect our coral reefs, not only as a source of entertainment for our guests and residents alike, but also as a food source. And lastly, as it helps protect many of our infrastructure when we have some of the hurricanes, like we saw 2 Cat 5s in 2017 and Irma Maria here in the U.S. Virgin Islands. And then lastly, we do believe that it's important to continue to plant trees all around the islands. Even as we developed in certain areas, it's critical for us to continue to move forward in making sure that we do replace what we take down. Next slide. We have been very concerned about where we are in terms of our active involvement in sustainability in the islands, and we are using the Sustainable Development Goals as a measuring stick for us. And the first one we deal with is the need for us to keep our people safe. And throughout the COVID pandemic, Governor Albert Bryan, Lieutenant Governor Tregenza Roach, and the COVID team have put very, very clear and understandable protocols in place that helped us manage our COVID cases. We also believe that it's critical for us to make sure that we have clean water across our islands. It's important for us to have renewables that help us. As I mentioned, 60% of our GDP is tourism based. And as a direct result of that, we have many people that come in and out. And sometimes in the highest seasons, we have almost 30% of our population percentage-wise come in from the mainland to the territory. So as you can see, we do have a need to ensure that we have resources that can sustain the long term. Again, we do recognize the need and the importance for us to move away from fossil fuel. Not only is it more costly, but what we've seen is that the impact it can have on our environment is not good for us locally, and clearly from a global standpoint, we are witnessing in terms of some of our Mother Nature events that we have, they seem to be a little more harsh than they were, especially when I grew up in St. Thomas a few decades ago. To have 2 Category 5 hurricanes in Irma and Maria within 2 weeks was an eye-opener for many of us that live in this part of the Caribbean. We believe that in order for us to continue to be a thriving tourism destination, we have to create jobs and economic opportunities that are outside of the government and that have indirect ties to the tourism product. Clearly, the direct ties of hotels and cruise ships can and have proven to be economic sources for many of us, but they're also indirect assets that come out and attributes that come out of tourism. You have many businesses that are restaurants and bars that are locals frequent, but when we do the case study on it, we see that those businesses tend to thrive more when there are several cruise ships in town versus no cruise ships in town. That taxi driver that works in the retail store tends to walk away with more money when the ships are around and when they're not. And as a direct result, they spend in the community and that dollar stays circulating within our territory. This has been a hurdle for us here in the territory is our ability to recycle. We believe that it's necessary. We have struggled, I believe, in this aspect simply because I don't believe we have the population of some of our other islands and definitely not in the majority of the United States to sustain a recyclable program. We've started a few times. I believe this is an area that is ripe for investment from the USVI, whether it's the government or the private sector. What I can attest to over the years is our landfills continue to rise from the ground up, and that's a omen that we need to be mindful of and start to really increase our recycling and promotional stuff. And that also ties into the need for us to start growing our own food locally. We've been having our legislature and our governor a few years back recognized the need to protect one of our most important resources, which is our coral reefs and our underwater activities. And we implemented a law that outlaws sunscreens that are harmful to the environment. We have begun recently in tourism to promote that messaging to our millions plus guests that come to the territory. And we are in an active campaign to get the messaging across and make sure not only do our visitors that come to the territory understand that certain sunscreens are banned, but also make sure that sunscreens that are not banned are readily available around the territory, including our hotels. As a direct link to that, it is critical for us to protect our coral reef. And we have been working with our local Department of Planning and Natural Resources and several other private sector organizations, including our Hotel Tourism Association, to ensure that we protect our most precious natural resources. Again, same theme, protection of our natural resources is very, very much at the forefront. One of our best assets is St. John, and arguably one of the reasons why St. John continues to be a shining gem for us in our U.S. Virgin Islands portfolio is because 75% of the island is national park and owned by the federal government. And they do a very good job working with our local regulators to ensure that we protect that. And we have a beacon of sustainability right here in the U.S. Virgin Islands, and we just have to continue to recognize that and learn from that. You'll see this theme over and over for us as a tourism-dependent destination, and our economy depends on it. We have to protect our coral reefs. We did a brand study in the U.S. Virgin Islands early in COVID, and not surprising to many of us in the hospitality business, the #1 reason why people come to the U.S. Virgin Islands is our beaches and our water environment. And clearly, many of you on this line know better than me the importance of protecting the coral reefs all around us. And we will continue to invest in making sure that we do protect that. We continue to work with our marine industry. One of the outflows of the COVID pandemic in the U.S. Virgin Islands has been the resurgence of our marine business. Our super mega yacht business is thriving. Our charter yacht business, our day boating, all of the aspects have grown significantly in the 2-year period of COVID, along with the U.S. Virgin Islands being amongst the top in the region in performance in overnight guests. So we continue to work with our local partners, the Virgin Islands Professional Charter Association, in terms of making sure that we have the Green Flag Pledge, which has 5 tenets to keep the reef safe, reduce plastics on board, because we know many of the plastics end up in the water, sustainable seafood, make sure we don't overfish our precious resources under the water, make sure we have anchorage etiquette, have necessary moorings in popular bays. And last but not least is we have to be accountable. It's our resources as Virgin Islanders. We know it, and we lead by example. Again, we live in a hurricane belt, and it's critical for us to understand that every year we have hurricanes. We have to prepare, we have to respond. We know better than most we're resilient and we will recover, but we want to make sure the recovery period is as short as possible.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. So now we have 12 more minutes to go, and I will pass it to John DeFries, CEO of the Hawaii Tourism Authority.
Thank you. And Ilihia, could you share my slide?
Yes, I can see it.
Okay.
Thank you.
At the Hawaii Tourism Authority, this outlines our mission. It's a mission that I accepted when I stepped in here 6 months into the pandemic, September of 2020. Also, a strategic plan that had been adopted about 60 days before the pandemic hit that outlined 4 pillars that serve as the framework around which our work at the Tourism Authority is conducted. And our work spans from the Mecca of Hawaii tourism, which is Waikiki, all the way to our community and sacred sites like this one here at Waipio Valley on Hawaii Island. Going back to 2019, we ended the year with a record number of visitor arrivals, 10,400,000. To put that in context, there are roughly 1.4 million residents in our islands. What we learned is at that level, at that scale, we began to feel the pressures in our community and an increase in community resentment. On the flip side of it is that it generated 17.7 billion in visitor expenditures, of which 2.2 billion came in the form of state taxes. Within that 2.2 billion, 600 million came from transient accommodation taxes. And then you'll see what was appropriated to our agency and the operation of our convention center. So roughly for every state dollar that was spent, $20 came back in the form of state tax revenue. That 2.2 billion is roughly 25% of the state's annual budget. And then the pandemic hit. This is probably a photo taken July of 2020. And local residents felt like we got our islands back. The beaches were empty, there was no traffic congestion, and it produced a temporary euphoria, if you will. The Tourism Authority took advantage of this void and embarked upon an aggressive effort to enter each of our island communities in the form of destination management action plans. We have 4 counties here in the state of Hawaii, and what you see there are 4 plans that were actually developed by people of those island communities. This was a way of taking tourism at our scale and bringing it down into a very personal community by community, neighborhood by neighborhood approach. And these plans can be found on our website at the Tourism Authority. These faces will not mean much to you. They mean a lot to me because within this group, you've got an owner of a hotel chain, a major attraction, Hawaiian cultural practitioners, marine sciences. You have people in forestry, botany. On each of the islands, a steering committee that was made up of a diverse makeup who could look at tourism in a 360-degree view, and then begin to have the difficult decisions and difficult discussions about what a regenerative model of tourism looked like for their island specifically. The outcome is that, and this is a snapshot of one of the pages there that outlines actions that need to be taken, who the lead agency is in each case, and then the phasing is each year over the next 3 years. And so these have been outlined. It's the Tourism Authority's responsibility to make sure that the appropriate resources are brought to bear. What we learned from this is that the community was really calling for a model of tourism that was regenerative. Do we want our natural resources to be in better condition 3 generations from now than it is today? Unanimously, yes. Do we want the Hawaiian language to flourish to a greater degree than it does with our traditional practices perpetuated and made relevant? The answer is yes. And do we want the multi-ethnic community that defines Hawaii, held together by a spirit we call aloha? Do we want that more resilient 3 generations from now? The answer is yes. And it's important that we're able to see that far into the future and make these first 3 pillars the centerpieces of our brand marketing strategy. And so finding that balance becomes challenge number 1. Critical to this are the indigenous voices. And 14 of our Native Hawaiian leaders came together in May of 2020 to put together what is known as the Aina Aloha. Aina, that which feeds us, or a reference to the land. Aina Aloha, the love of the land, into an economic futures declaration that is built on these 4 pillars. And this provides us an additional framework in which to engage with the community in particular. And I'm happy to say that one of my own executives is one of the 14 co-authors of that declaration. Going back to July of 2014, the Aloha Plus Challenge was adopted by each of the mayors of our islands, as well as the governor at that time. 6 goals in sustainability to be achieved by the year 2030. Again, this was July of 2014. This will give you a snapshot of the dashboard on how we are measuring each of those 6 goals, the progress we're making or not making. And now the opportunity comes for us to merge Hawaii's largest industry, tourism, into an alignment with these goals. The Aloha Plus Challenge essentially is Hawaii's contribution and initiative to advance the Sustainable Development Goals. Hawaii Green Growth is the backbone organization, the private-public partnership that drives the Aloha Plus Challenge. It accepted an invitation from the United Nations to become a local 2030 Islands Hub. And here you see the governor seated in the middle, with the Speaker of the House to his left, and to his right, and the President of our Senate to his left, adopting and accepting the invitation of the United Nations. On one level, we're dealing with this scale of activity, and then you see, I want you to orient yourself to this hotel in the bottom left, the pink hotel. It's the Royal Hawaiian Hotel, and you see this iconic shot of Mount Leahi, or what is known as Diamond Head. When I was 6 years old, I grew up 2 blocks off of this beach, and a half block from that corner hotel. And when I was 6 years old, this is what the beach looked like. You see the pink hotel to the left. I point this out because growing up in a Native Hawaiian family, there was something we understood about this beach that along the way we may have lost sight of. That number one, it was a source of food. We fished these waters every week. We consumed what we caught, we shared what we caught. And this was a center, basically a grocery store for the neighborhood, because a number of us in the neighborhood would fish these waters. What we also knew was this was a place of medicine, because the elders understood the certain kinds of seaweed, the certain kinds of sea urchins that were medicinal in nature and applied and used in our families at that time. And third, it was a place of recreation and well-being. And along the way, we have become detached from that and prioritized the recreational value. And in our effort to move toward a regenerative model, to actually live a regenerative model, it's going to be essential that we get these priorities back in order. The organizing principle is malama. When we talk about equity, when we talk about environmental justice, when we talk about resilience, malama means to care for, protect, to nurture, and becomes the organizing principle for our work at the Tourism Authority. And it's urgent because earlier, as I stated, the impacts that have been made from this scale of tourism can be felt in our neighborhoods. And relative to climate change, 6 weeks ago, this home was consumed by high wave activity on the North Shore. And so the mantra for us is caring for my beloved home, making this very personal and understanding that tourism, when done correctly, can actually be an instrument of advancing goals that we share in common. And I'll end it there with this beautiful shot of Waipio Valley, among the more sacred sites in our state. Thank you.
Thank you very much for attending this meeting. We had over 50 people, 54 people now. It's been a pleasure, and let's keep the conversation going. And good afternoon from New York City. Bye-bye. Thank you.